Here we are. Moshe, thank you so much for joining me for a very important, it's a bit unusual little interview here. I'm so glad
Yeah,
to, yeah, no, I'm so glad to be chatting with you.
yeah. Thank you for extending the invitation.
Of course, yeah, it was so like pretty incredible when Josh Dworsky, Rabbi Dworsky, who was the Carleton College rabbi, emailed. I was like, man, like I was kind of putting everything together, and I had the chance to read your pieces in the New York Times and Newsweek, your writings about Israel and the your family's tragedy, ongoing tragedy, at the hands of Hamas. And I was just when Shersh kind of wrote it, triangulated things for me. So I was excited to be able to touch base with you about this. Though again, like this is and I'm so glad we're talking about this, but it's also a very heart heavy topic that goes without
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. It's difficult to talk about, but that's something I've been doing for the past 2 years next week. And we now talk about it with the aim to bring home the hostages, including my brother-in-law Omri, who is still held captive, and to bring an end to the war. Which is impacting us as Israelis and of course impacts the entire region, our Palestinian neighbors, etc. Um, yeah, but I'm sure we'll be speaking about it for years to come after the crisis is over, in different formats, with the aim to continue raising awareness that the acts of October the 7th, the hostage taking, uh, are not acts that can be normalized or ones that we as Israelis can accept, while also taking responsibility for what followed um, and hopefully creating a path for a better future in Israel and Gaza. That's my hope.
I mean, that's a hope I definitely share with you. And yeah, those who are watching this now have almost certainly read to the point in my October 7th essay where they've been introduced not just to the tragedy your family's experienced, but also to just what I'll describe as kind of a misapprehension of just like Israel as a just Israel as a not just a nation, but as a kind of like a concept. It's kind of weird to say this,
Mm.
but like linked with Jewish identity, and a the idea of Jewish self-determination, right? And the kind of like multifarious Israeli culture, what it is to be Israeli, like what all that means, I feel is really been erased in a lot of the discourse in the West around the Israel-Hamas conflict. Um, Additionally, just as you mentioned, right, there's like so much rich kind of like Israeli and Palestinian just like shared cultural heritage and coexistence that is also being erased, or at the very least underexplored. So what I kind of want to start from uh, just to the top here with you, I want to talk about like what you feel as an Israeli citizen who has done or now lives in the States, has been educated in the States and also in Norway, which is a really cool fact that I just learned from you moments ago. What do you think like is missing from the West's political vocabulary about Israel? If we take away the kind of like the like Likud Netanyahu, the way that I think like the current Israeli government is either like being received or being depicted. If we kind of just think of Israel as an entity, and what does Israel mean? Who are Israelis? What do you think is missing from the conversation on the topic?
It's a good question. I'm going to close my blinds for a second because the sun is on my face. So 1 second.
No worries. You might have frozen a bit too. Let's see. Hopefully
Right.
you want to turn your
And
camera
I'm
on and off
back.
again. You back?
Um,
There you are. Okay,
yeah, I had to
perfect.
close my blinds. They
Makes
were
sense.
bothering my eyes. But yeah, it's an important question to ask. I think for many Israelis who are experiencing what's going on in the discourse in the West, we are feeling completely erased
Mm,
and at times even not recognized. Um, in some ways, it seems like Jewish self-determination, in a way that has been common across all nations, has not been accepted, and is rejected outright, as if we are different than other peoples, as if we are not entitled to be self-determined in our own nation state, in what we believe is our ancestral land. And again, as I said earlier, I believe in coexistence with the Palestinians, and I also respect their right for self-determination to live in their own independent nation state in parts of the lands of Israel, which we'll have to compromise territorially about. Um, but the discourse in the West, I think in a lot of, especially in the younger generation, but also in academia, in the cultural space, in the arts, it seems as if we as Jewish people are not entitled to have self-determination, to have our own nationhood, to feel like we are people. We have to be sidelined to be minority, a religious minority in other countries when people don't realize that as an ethno-religion and as an ethno-religion with a national identity that goes far thousands of years, we don't feel like that we are simply a minority in other countries. Some may feel comfortable living like that, and they should. Jews should live and wherever they want, just like people of different nationalities go and live in other countries, or different religions go and live in other countries. But we also need to have our own space. And the discourse that came out of October the 7th, sadly, has only intensified the fact we are not entitled for a nation state, that we are invaders and a colonial enterprise in our own region, where our history comes from, where our DNA comes from, um, and where our like national ethos and cultural ethos come from, whether we like it or not. And it's ingrained as well in our religion. There is a reason why we say next year in Jerusalem. There is a reason why the land of Israel plays a central part in our religion. It doesn't mean that it justifies um, justifying rejecting the rights of other peoples in the land because they also have affinity to it. Doesn't religion, our religion should not just justify heinous acts, just like other religions should not. But it does provide us, but there is that element in our religion that the land of Israel is part of it. And
mm,
for me, it's difficult that Jewish self-determination is rejected. The Zionism is a slur word. When I grew up, it wasn't. When I went to boarding school in Norway with people from 89 countries, they did not treat it as a slur word, but simply as the self-determination of the Jewish people. But I don't think that's the case now. In many spheres of influence, in academia, in the cultural world, and in social media, the discourse there is very difficult for me to process, to be honest. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Oh, you
uh,
absolutely did. And before I ask
and
my
I will just
follow-up,
add,
oh
I
yeah,
think people should not conflate governments with people, governments
yes,
with nations.
yes,
Just like I don't think every Italian person is good or bad because Giorgia Meloni is the Prime Minister of Italy.
right,
And some of her policies might be perceived as positive or negative, depends where you are in the political spectrum. And the
right,
same goes to any other country. I just gave a random example. It goes to this country where I'm speaking from, not American, but it goes to the US, goes to UK, wherever we want to go. Also goes to the, you know, countries we don't speak about, like in African continent, whether it's South Africa or Sudan or the Congo or Mauritania, it doesn't matter. And in South America,
What
it
or
doesn't matter where. I don't
yeah,
conflate governments with people, and I find
yes.
it offensive that in every encounter, I have to be both serve as a spokesperson for some reason for my government because I'm cornered to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
also hold responsibility for everything it does, even if I reject some of its actions, even if
Hmm.
I go on the streets and demonstrate against it, even if I did
Hmm.
not vote for this party or the other party that are currently in a coalition government. So that's another thing that really hurts me in the discourse in the Western world. And I'm generalizing, but uh, that's the general sense of it.
Listen, I'm happy to take it. Not that I agree with you. I'm happy to take it a step further and say bold of American leftists to impute, they whatever like a government's beliefs to a people while living under, a president whom they are outspokenly in disagreement with. Bold of folks to also overlook when you were naming like Sudan and the Congo. I was like, well, what about Syria? There's an obvious example. I mean, you cannot conflate a government with the people. And I think that I really want to get into this more, this concept of self-determination as well, because I think it's so helpful in motion when we think not just about like the the possibility of, in fact, the reality, right, of Israeli citizens being both at odds or in agreement, whatever, a variety of spectrum of political beliefs, vis-a-vis their political or governmental leadership, but also Palestinians, right? Like I think I've been reading more and more essays in this fantastic journal called Liberties from Palestinians who are like really just agog at the West's tacit support of the Hamas government. But I think that and before lest I get too into the weeds myself, I really want to ask you what you are like like as an Israeli, as a Jewish person, right? Like what is the concept of self-determination, especially like vis-a-vis Israel, mean for you?
Um, for me, what it means is that we have, as people, an independent nation within a defined territory in where we perceive to be our homeland and where we determine our course, our destiny, our politics. This is our culture, and this is how I see self-determination in practice. And in theory, it is the idea that there is something that connected us so much as people and pushed us to determine together that we want to live in one society and build a society together. And it could be external factors like anti-Semitism, um, and of course, the pogroms and the Spanish Inquisition and the Holocaust and uh, many atrocities that happen against Jews in countries where my grandparents came from in the Arab world and the Islamic world. As I'm a Sephardic, as a Mizrahi Jew.
Mm.
Um, so there were external elements that pushed us to determine after nearly 2000 years that we want to be a society again. But also there was always this internal grappling within the Jewish world. All right, we were exiled. What do we do now? Are we going to reestablish our state again in the future? Are we going to try and integrate with other nations? And we're still grappling with that discussion, and every Jewish person, I think, who is involved in their communities knows that that discussion still exists. What is the right path for the Jewish people? And there could be two paths. There are Jews who want to integrate in other societies and those who want to create their own nation state. And I think that still the vast majority of Jews, it appears to be in support of the notion of a nation state in Israel, but also in the diaspora. So that's my notion of self-determination, both in practice and in theory.
I Yeah, I'm thinking here too about this next question I had written down, like the it kind of threads together a couple of different very not just important unto themselves but germane to each other topics you've brought up, which is
And
the
I wish
yeah,
your viewers will,
yeah,
or whoever reads this, this is one of the most influential books, in my opinion, because it provides writings about the Zionist
yeah.
idea from all spectrum of the Jewish discourse uh,
Mm.
in the previous centuries, the 19th, 20th, etc. Um,
Oh,
and it sheds light, I think it will shed light to people how thoughtful was the discourse on the Zionist idea, on the establishment of the state of Israel, of the notion of moving to the land of Israel when it was occupied by the Ottomans or after that by the Brits, etc. But people are so, I tend to see people being afraid to engage even with Jewish texts at times, and rather engage only with texts that conform to what their perception or is already is. And this
yeah.
one, this is a book I have since Carlton days because we had
Mm.
a seminar there that we set up for people interested to learn about the Zionist idea. And
Mm.
people joined from Carlton, not necessarily Jews, to learn about Zionism.
Yeah,
Um, and we had amazing debates there that uh, sometimes allowed us to question the Zionist idea, sometimes allowed us to enforce it, and from people from different backgrounds and different nationalities and also different political opinions at Carleton. Uh,
yeah,
and I wish this sort of discourses were still possible in American colleges. My sense is that right now, even putting the word Zionist on a seminar or in a, like extracurricular for students might pose a backlash. And it's very sad to me. But this is, I sidetracked, but I just thought about it because it was
no,
behind.
yeah. I'll Arthur Hertzberg Zionist. I'll be happy to link to that. Yeah, I mean, and on the topic of academia's conformity, I think you're so right, Moshe. Like, it used to be that Cornell West, right, was appealing to both Black Americans and Jewish Americans to understand the commonalities of the diasporic experience and like what self-determination means. If like in a return to Africa or return to Israel. And now, in the kind of that was still a post like Edward Said world,
Yep.
right? But it seems that I am going to kind of call it Saidianism. I'm calling it that in the essay, but there's a post-colonialism and the kind of like hardcore historical materialism have teamed up, and we're kind of back in a lot of ways to I don't know if you remember what year it was. I just learned about this that the UN resolution that included Zionism among the like evils of like
Yeah.
oh yeah, was it the 70s? Was it late
It
70s?
was a Zionism is racism
Zionism is racism.
resolution in the General
Yeah,
Assembly in 1975.
75. That's
And
it. Thank you.
um, forgot the number of the resolution, but it linked Zionism and the state of Israel and the concept of Jewish self-determination as a form of racism and racial discrimination.
Mm.
And it was a completely political move that was revoked because of politics.
Yes.
Eventually, revoked because of the fall of the Soviet Union, which was one of the leaders of the original resolution with the Arab League and
Yeah.
Muslim majority countries. So the downfall of the Soviet Union and also the Oslo and the Madrid first and then the Oslo process made it as if, oh no, Zionism is not racism because now the political landscape change, and we can say it otherwise. Um, and I'm sure now that if the UN will decide to introduce something similar, they will condemn us again for our self-determination, even though in the UN Charter, every nation is giving the right for self-determination, and that's rooted even before in the League of Nations. And specifically for the Jewish people, it's rooted in a legally binding conference called the San Remo Conference post-World War I, where our self-determination was recognized, was adopted by the League of Nations, later on by the United Nations after the Second World War. Um, and Zionism is simply that. It's simply the name of a concept, just like there's French nationalism, and
Hmm.
English nationalism, uh, the Greek nationalism that allowed Greece to be a nation state, released from
Hmm.
the occupation of the Ottomans, Italian, etc. We can go further. I understand this is difficult
Sure.
for people to understand, and maybe in a post-net. People think we live in a post-nation state world, but we don't. There's most of the world is still built on the concept of nation states in Europe, in Africa, in South America, in Asia. Um, Maybe we should break that concept, but Israel should not be the only target if we decide to revamp the world order. Uh,
Right.
if, if you'll say no nation states, and Israel will have to be one of those nation states that no longer exist, I'm perfectly fine with that general statement because you're making a general moral argument that nation states are XYZ and should not exist. But if you say only Israel should exist, but we should create a Palestinian nation state, or we should allow Saudi Arabia to continue be a nation state for Arabs or Muslims and find their original story in the Arabian desert in the Arabian Peninsula. Um, I find it I really find an insult into intelligence that people do that, to be honest.
Well, honestly, that was going to be kind of my follow-up question because, I think you and I have more than a glancing familiarity with this, but it might come as a kind of a surprise to folks, these cycles of anti-Semitism and where rising tides of public anti-Semitism, which George Orwell wisely warned against, what that signals, right? And why opposing opposing Jews or opposing being an anti-Semite feels more like an idea than a bigotry to people and has since the 19th century. Um, when Fyodor Dostoevsky was a huge raging anti-Semite towards the end of his writing career. But anyway, sorry, like this, you got me thinking about a lot of different things. But the question I want to ask you is, like this sort of like we live in a post-nation state world, except Israel's a nation state and it can't be a nation state. Or like, like I'm not an anti-Semite, except here I am saying openly anti-Semitic rhetoric. These are all forms of doublethink, right? And you called these out, I think, very, very effectively in your Newsweek essay. We had a message to progressive America, basically, again, writing as someone who has family members who are victimized by Hamas and one who is still being held by them. You appealed to progressive readership to ask themselves, if you are so committed to liberation, why are you not committed to the liberation of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas? It was a great essay, and I'm really interested to kind of hear from you. What other forms of doublethink have you seen arising since October 7th, and just like around talking about topics like this?
I think that essay tried to capture much of it. The double thing I see is, on the general sense, that again the question of our existence as a Jewish state, a Jewish nation state, um, the question of our existence as a community that is more than a religion. And again, I recognize the fact we are an imagined community, like Benedict Anderson coined, but all communities are imagined. Obviously, I don't share much, perhaps, with a Jewish person that I've never met before in Argentina, but we are part of an imagined community. And whether we like it or not, it's part of our identity. So it seems like at times my imagined community, my community, Jewish community, is questioned while other imagined communities are not questioned. Um, the rhetoric on violence, I already saw it on October the 7th as my family members was my entire immediate family trying to survive Hamas terrorists across different points of the attack. Already seen on that night on social media, people are celebrating it, who are rationalizing what has happened, who are justifying what is happening right now to people, the slaughter, the rape of people for who they are, where they are. Um, the murder and their kidnapping. It was sick to me because they would not have done it in any other. I mean, I just could not imagine them doing this when discussing other conflicts. Um, so the justification of death, and we saw it as well this week, where people were rationalizing what happened in the UK, in Manchester, when two Jews who left services on Yom Kippur lost their lives because of terrorists, an alleged terrorist, at least according to the recent reports of the UK police, the Manchester police, someone who was being radicalized. Um, and people were rationalizing it and are still rationalizing it in ways that are sick, as if it is a right to target Zionist Jews, Zionist synagogues. Um, no, it's not all right. And so that level of, in a way, it's a double speak because you will not speak like that about other communities. And you will not, erase an identity of other communities in ways that our communities sometimes erase, reduce to reduced to food at times simply. And there was a Jewish actress who did it 2 weeks ago when she reduced her Judaism to pickles after going on the stage on the Emmys and saying Free Palestine. She can say it, but don't reduce my Jewish identity to pickles and erase the fact I'm an Israeli citizen who believe in my self-determination in the land of Israel. I mean, maybe I like pickles. That's irrelevant. It's not even part of my Jewish ethos because I'm not. I'm from a different Jewish sect, but it was for me very like
Very
it was
Ashkenazi at
funny. It was funny
for
to
sure.
see, but it was kind of insulting. Like you're also insulting yourself by reducing us to food. Food is part of the culture, but um, so yeah.
I
There are
mean,
just those examples.
totally. Yeah. And I think in Hannah Einbinder's case too, I was talking with a friend because we had like a Yom Kippur, we had like a gathering and I was talking with him afterwards and he was talking actually about her stand-up special and how immensely engaged with Jewish culture and identity and tradition and like being a diaspora Jew and being an LA Jew, like but like really like it was really thoughtful. Um, and it shocked me because like I'm a fan of the show. I like her and when she was doing her when she's so Free Palestine on the stage, right? Sure, and then kind of giving the after like the after the awards interviews and she was struggling to even like she was doing the double think of well you criticize Zionism, it's not criticizing Jew, but like she was trying to kind of wrap her mind around that dialectic. And then she like someone asked her like, oh, like what is Judaism mean to you or something, and then she was like, it is such a, and there was like a like six dot ellipsis in there. And she says institution. And I was like, girl, that this is so much more to you than, like a single kind of vaguely like sort of abstract noun. And it was it hurt, I think, and it has hurt to see folks divest themselves of Jewish culture and identity because of, I mean, I know I've been through my whole own yada yada. It'll be in the essay. We don't need to go into it here, but it's painful, right? To kind of be reading Judith Butler, right? And you're like, oh, I really respect Judith Butler's theories on like, gender, queer theory, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's
So
get
do
into
I.
this
I
topic on
enjoy
Judith.
reading her so much as a history major as well. Um,
But then she talks about
but
Israel, and you're like, dude, like,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, and that's the other thing too.
And
I'm glad
again,
you
I
enjoy
see
the
it in
book. I don't
academia
mean to
so
interrupt.
much. Yeah. But I see it in academia so much in writings of people and how sometimes they write so much on, let's say, Black liberation in the
Hmm.
context of the African continent and also in the context of racial relations in the US,
Hmm.
but they can't see us, or at least I'm not feeling seen by them as someone who's also worthy of being liberated. And
Right.
for me, Zionism and Jewish self-determination was a form of liberation from an oppressive diaspora that for 2,000 years played with the Jewish people, sometimes being nice to us and then turning against us. And, in the context of Russia, which is, one of the places where a Jewish community thrived on one hand, but also was
Mm.
disseminated because of the Russians authorities over the years. One time you will have a czar that would try and integrate the Jews, but then his
Yep.
son will come along and will do the exact opposite and send Cossacks to murder Jews. And that's my feeling. I don't want to be oppressed by others. I don't want to be dependent on others or their welfare. I don't want to have a Napoleon who emancipate Jews, only to have then those who rejected Napoleon to come along and reverse that. I just want to be in my own state, and that's for me also part of Zionism, charting your own course as a nation. And nations make mistakes, and nations not only mistakes, they at times commit sins, and they'll have to pay the price for that through the legal institutions of the post-war order. But I prefer to pay those prices as a nation and be held accountable as an independent nation than be dependent on other rulers or
Mm.
state institutions that I simply don't trust in other nations.
I could not agree with you more, and I think that is an excellent accounting of what Zionism is and intends to do. Um, I want to I want to talk about kind of the most crucial topic here, I think, for two of us, which is I've mentioned it before, but the kidnapping of your brother-in-law Omri and the terrible trauma endured by your sister Lishay and your nieces Roni and Alma at Kibbutz Nahal Oz on October 7th, 2023. So this is this really tragic event that you've detailed in outlets such as the New York Times and Newsweek. And I'm going to quote you here. This being your family members, watched their neighbors slaughtered. They saw their community set ablaze. And then Lishay, Roni, and Alma saw Omri dragged into Gaza. Lishay and the girls they were left behind, terrified and unsure if they would survive until they were rescued. And so you've written, Moshe, that the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th ought to be at the forefront of diplomatic discussions, the center of Israel's demands, and the focus point for the American response to the conflict. World leaders, irrespective of our spectrum of political affiliation, should be united behind our demand for their immediate release. I wholeheartedly agree, and I would like to hear more about why you'd like to see this very difficult matter or excuse me, how you'd like to see this very difficult matter approached politically, culturally, socially. And I just want to add too that what you said just before I asked this question about essentially how in the sort of arena of liberation politics, Jews have escaped for not for better, for worse, the subaltern label. So there can be no Jewish liberation because, as my rabbi put it, we're either vermin or we control everything, or both at once. And these are the kind of the anti-Semitic
It's like
stereotypes. And
we're
so
both communist and capitalist. That was the
what,
notion in early 20th century Europe. The Jews are both
right?
the communist of the continent and the capitalist of the continent. Uh, It's
It's
exactly
so
like what your rabbi
incoherent to
said.
me. Yeah, and it's don't even get me started on what Karl Marx wrote about fellow Jews. Like it's so, yeah, I know you know all of this, but like it's so anyway. I'm really curious because it is important, I think, to both of us, to so many of us, to continue to hold space, not Dutch, God, just like political, cultural, dialectical, everything, space for the like victimization of Palestinian civilians and the ongoing violence. It's horrific. And at the same time, the cultural, political, yada yada space for the Israeli victims, right, is shrinking if it even existed to begin with. And so I'm wondering how you'd like to see this conversation approached.
Yeah, I mean, when regarding the hostage crisis, what I exhibited is that there has been a consistent call to release the hostages, but there's not been enough pressure on the main culprits, Hamas and their accomplices, to actually release them. That there's not been enough, portrayal of the narrative that Hamas, the onus is on them. It
Mhm.
appears at times that the onus is only on the state of Israel, as if Israel will decide today that the hostages will be released, they'll be released. That's not the case. The hostages are held by Hamas. They were kidnapped by Hamas and are held by Hamas because for them they are chips in a game. They're not human beings.
Mm, yep.
And it's so complex to reach an agreement with a terrorist organization, and make the compromises as a government after your people were slaughtered under your watch, by that terrorist organization, that Israel cannot simply give up on itself just to release the hostages, but just to Hamas will release the hostages. It has to be simply, it just had to happen, through pressure of the international community on Hamas. And sadly, some members of the international community, or already early on in the war, countries like South Africa, on one hand, which, when I grew up, I adored as a place that achieved a tremendous liberation, in a sense, from oppressors,
Mm.
and was able to build a society with a lot of problems, but is able to build a functioning country, that is, um, pursuing justice and pursuing, coexisting within itself now. And when I saw them pursuing, already in the early days of the war, blaming Israel for everything that's happening, uh, it was unacceptable, in my opinion, when they were pushing Hamas narratives. The same for Iran, which I understand, of course, they're Hamas sponsors, and that's how they're going
Yep.
to speak. But also for countries like Turkey and Qatar, which are considered U.S. allies, no matter who is in power in the U.S., a Democrat or a Republican, both of these countries are considered U.S. allies. Turkey is
Mm.
also in NATO. The way they speak about Israel, the way they speak about Hamas on the other hand, referring to our hostages as prisoners. Omri is not a prisoner of war. Hamas is not a signatory to the Geneva Convention. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It doesn't uphold the Geneva Convention.
Right.
It tortures the hostages. It deprives them of food, water, sanitation. It doesn't allow visitation of an international body like the ICRC. and the list goes on. And even if Omri was, let's say, a soldier, would not have been a prisoner of war.
Right.
But this is why the ICRC determined that even soldiers kidnapped by Hamas are not prisoners of war because Hamas does not respect the rules of war.
Nope.
And people and I see members of the international community who speak as if they do, and speak of the hostages as if they're prisoners. Omri is not a prisoner. He was kidnapped from his home. His wife and his daughters were held captive with him. They were held at gunpoint. Their, as I said in that essay to the New York Times, their community was, first of all, uprooted. Members of their community were slaughtered. Um, Houses in that community were burnt to the ground. And people all across southern Israel experienced the most horrific things that day. Um, and those who were kidnapped are not prisoners. And so that narrative, that's one of the things that upset me from the early days of the war, when I did not see a real international community standing, really everyone unequivocally saying, this is unacceptable. We are sending all our ambassadors in Israel to the border until all the hostages are home.
Mhm.
I don't care. In my opinion, they should have said to Israel, no need to send your military. We are sending our militaries to stand on the border until Hamas releases the hostages. This is what should have been the response, so that Hamas will understand that what they've done has been horrific. And instead, what Hamas has received are only rewards from the international community. And I'm afraid they will become only more empowered here. And that's to the detriment of both Israelis and Palestinians. People in the West will not know that yesterday Hamas murdered 7 Palestinians in Gaza because the traditional media does not report that.
Yep.
But I have Gazan friends who know that, and they make sure to report about that, but nobody listens to them. And those kind of cases happen on a daily basis. And they happened way before October the 7th, because Hamas created an authoritarian Islamist regime that in any other context, people of left affiliations in the West would not see as a proper government or a government they should endorse in any possible way. I simply cannot see a humanist with left-wing affiliations see an Islamist authoritarian regime that oppresses its own people,
Right.
irrespective of what Israel is doing and what may be wrong, might be right, etc., irrespective of the Israeli role in this conflict. Hamas is an evil organization that created an authoritarian Islamist state. And the fact people justify them, adore them. Only today in the streets of New York, there was a demonstration in support of in a way continuing the war, because what they're chanting there is not Hamas release the hostages, end the war, Israel end the war. What they're chanting there is from the river to the sea, which means Israel should not exist. What they're chanting
Right.
there is intifada, revolution,
Yep.
which means we need to continue the violence. So in a way,
Yep.
they're asking Hamas continue to fight, and continue this war, even though they're not the ones who are suffering. Those who are suffering are the Palestinians in Gaza, who many of them, I believe, do not want this war to continue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you referred to Hamas's like kind of psychological operations, right? Or psychological warfare, which I think is just such a great way of describing how not only is this terrorist organization fighting this battle with this sort of brute, like just ultra, like hair-raisingly inhumane um treatment of its hostages, Israeli citizens, and just intense violence. But also misinformation, right? So just now, as in 1938, as in, the Pale of Settlement, as in you name the era, right? There's going to be kind of like Simon of Trent, right? There's going to be a manipulation of information that is going to implicate Israel or somehow implicate Jewish self-determination more broadly. And I feel like From the River to the Sea is such a great example because someone could be scrolling Instagram, it's like, oh, this really lovely picture of this like beautiful watermelon slice, the river to this. It's like that is a genocidal chant. Like that is a the kind of the Palestinian the Grand Mufti meeting with Hitler kind of energy. And I think that what
And
feels
you know, when I
important,
see the radical right in Israel saying that, that's what I tell them.
that's
This
what it,
is
yes, it's the
this
same.
is something that is
Yes.
unacceptable.
Yes.
But I do that, and instead of them rejecting Hamas, instead they are embracing their narrative and their chants and their slogans. And that's the
Mhm.
reason Hamas published about a year after the war, they published a manual why we did the war in English, because it was targeted to the Western English reader,
Yeah.
where they use the same kind of language and the same
Mhm.
terminology of the pseudo-academic terminology of colonialism, liberation,
Yeah.
resistance, it justified by all means,
Oppressor, occupier, settler. Yeah.
and they're successful. I'm not going to deny that.
Yes.
They're doing an incredible job, and I think there are state actors that are helping them behind the scenes on social media,
Yes.
just like there were state actors that are interfering with elections across Western countries over the
Yes.
past decade. Um, and it's troubling. It's so troubling for me to see the level of hatred. And, Sartre said anti-Semitism is a passion rather than a reasoned conviction. And that's what I'm seeing here. I don't see any rational ideology grounded.
Sartre is one to speak. Sorry,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Uh,
God.
Jean-Paul Sartre, the French
Yeah.
philosopher. Yeah.
Hmm.
He wrote an essay about this, about the Jewish question, reflections about the Jewish questions. I think that's how he translate to English. But in that essay, explained anti-Semites finds ways all the time to reinvent themselves and find why they hate Jews because
Hmm.
it's not grounded in any rationality or in a reasonable argument, but on emotions and a choice to
Yes.
be committed to this passion they have, passion of hatred of the Jewish, of concept of Jews. Um, and Hamas are using that because I think no matter how much the Western world repented, the Holocaust and the pogroms, and the Spanish king spoke in the UN last week as if Spain repented for the Spanish Inquisition by giving some Jews Spanish passports. Oh, thank you so much. I'm sure no matter
I'm
how
gonna
much they
enjoy.
repented and gave things to whatever reparations, there is always an underlying kind of societal tone in Western countries that I feel is anti-Semitic. I feel there's an anti-Semitic, I don't know how to explain it, but it can resurface in any
Yeah.
moment because there are enough elements in society that can radicalize those who might not be anti-Semitic by nature, but can be radicalized to become ones. Um, and I don't throw that word lightly. I hate when people throw it lightly. I hate when they are offended by every joke about Jews or every valid argument against conduct by the state of Israel or conduct of Jewish communities or statements made by Jews, etc. We should not throw that word lightly. But what I'm speaking is not about a specific person saying anti-Semitic things like Nick Fuentes or his likes in the US, but rather the underlying kind of movement we see that is under the surface most of the time, but can resurface every time something happens. And
Yes.
we'll find people who will rationalize it, like I said, just like the rational killing Jews in Manchester or killing
Mhm.
Jews in Boulder, Colorado, or targeting synagogues and Jewish communities and Jewish schools, etc. It's there all the time. Um, and Hamas knows how to, Hamas and their likes, it's not specifically only Hamas, but Iran, Hamas, and their likes know how to take advantage of that, especially in this world where social media can create viral things that are infesting society in a way, trends that infest society, just like the text Bin Laden wrote became popular a couple of years ago. I remember on TikTok or something like that,
Oh,
um, against America. It's justification of 9/11. Um, yeah, it's troubling. It's frustrating. Makes you feel sometimes like, why was I born Jewish? Like, why do I have to carry this burden that other people don't need to carry? Um, but at the same time, I'm happy I'm Jewish. I'm happy I have this history of tremendous people who introduced the world a beautiful book, beautiful set of laws, which they all have their flaws. I mean, the Bible has a lot of messed up stories as well, but I think overall it's a beautiful book of mythology and religion and laws that is the basis of a lot of our modern society in at least in the West. And and so I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of my country and its achievements and the fact we managed to become a country against all odds again. But it's just so tiring to be Jewish sometimes, and I think so many Jews feel it. Um,
yeah.
and yeah.
I mean, I think that the sort of the Jewish fatigue and the attempt to decouple from identity are really go hand in hand. But I want to something that's occurring to me and it feels important to point out. In our like there is my last point about Hamas, right? The idea that like Judaism and Zionism should be decoupled, and there should be this double thing where you are critical of Zionism, but somehow not of Judaism.
Mhm.
That is flawed, except the conflation. You have that happening over here on the left, and then the same kind of strain of thought, you have the conflation of Islamism, which is the bastard child of a whole lot of strains of thought that have nothing to do with
Oh
actual
yeah.
Islam. Nothing. But and and the conflation of that with the
And
Palestinian,
people should
right?
not
Or like,
conflate Islam with
oh,
Islamism.
no,
Islamism
but not the same.
is a
Not
radical, very political and violent
yes,
movement. Islam, on the other hand, is a beautiful religion.
beautiful
It, just
religion.
like
Yeah.
Judaism and Christianity, has as
Yes.
well messed up parts to it in its
Yes.
stories, in its core tenets. But in essence, I think religions are a beautiful thing. Human
Yes.
beings, on the other hand, they're problematic because yeah, I'm from the school of thought that of Thomas Hobbes that sees human as a problematic creature that is
Mm,
that needs order and needs discipline and needs a set of rules and laws in order to become less beastly and less violent. I think we are corrupt by our nature. But there are other school of thoughts that reject that. But that's how I see it, and which is why we can corrupt religions and the concept of religions, whether we're religious or not, and create those um, strings of thoughts that are very, very violent.
well, this last question, my final question for you, is actually going to ask you to step out of your Hobbesian cynicism about
Yeah.
the nature, the human condition,
Okay.
because it's not that I completely disagree with you, but I I I think a lot of people watching this and then reading what I've written above are going to wonder. I've introduced by now to readers the concept of tzedakah, right, and how like what are the righteous acts you could do? What does it mean to kind of return to teshuva, return to who you the person that you most want to be, right? When you reflect, you think, what do I want to do in the world? How do I want to be? How do I want to bring about good for myself, my community, my family? So I will have introduced to Shiva. I'm going to introduce to Daka. What would you say, Moshe? Someone reading this who's like, and watching this video who's like, wow, I want to know like how I can, what's a righteous act I could do? Like, what can I do to bring about more understanding and more peace? Like, what would your advice be to folks seeking to do that?
Hmm. Of what what tzedakah is for in my eyes, you mean?
What's the DACA like? Yes, and then what the DACA could apply to, for instance, this misinformation, doublethink, this like lack of peace, this lack of understanding, schisms, anything like that.
So for me, tzedakah first and foremost comes from tzedek,
Hmm.
justice, and
Hmm.
it comes from Deuteronomy, um, the book of Deuteronomy, where it said, "Justice, justice, you shall pursue." Um, People usually omit what comes after, which is you shall pursue in your own land, etc., which is the land of Israel. But um, we always have to pursue what is just, what seems to be right, go above and beyond to understand what is the just act now. And at times, the just act might not necessarily be the nicest act, but it would be one that needs to be done to pursue
Hmm.
justice, long-term justice. And um, and as well, besides justice, I think tzedakah comes as well from the love of what is beautiful in humanity. So humanity has a lot of imperfect, um, there is a lot of imperfect nature, as I said, to human beings, but we also have to embrace the fact that we are human beings and that we can create beautiful things together. And so there's a love for humanity that guides us. It's a bit like what Spinoza, how he viewed um, justice or tzedakah. There's like a collective purpose to better humanity from the love of humanity and the love of your community, um, our Jewish community, but also our wider communities. We're part of so many different communities, and people forget it. That we are, from the small things. Like I'm vegan, so I'm part of a vegan community, and I'm um, identify as a gay man, so I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, etc. Um, and I love books. So I'm part of the reading community. There are so many communities we're part of, and it's so beautiful, and we have to keep on finding beauty in that. Um, and when we try and pursue beauty in humanity, we in a way pursue improving it, which is tzedakah, the sense of improving humanity to better it. So it's both justice and betterment, and it comes from different strings, I guess, of Jewish thought. Um, but yeah, for me, it's a constant struggle of how we do it while we're also experiencing the ugly faces of humanity. How do we love it despite the fact, in a way, it's you know, what's the meaning of all of it? That's where it comes from and why we should pursue it. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus is trying to understand why are we pursuing life at all? Why we like Sisyphus keep rolling the the rock to the top of the mountain, even though we know it's going to keep falling down. And I guess we're doing it in a way because tzedakah gives us in a way meaning in life. Improving humanity gives us a meaning in life. We can take it to different avenues. How I took it in the last 2 years is is ensuring the hostage crisis remains at the forefront of policymakers when I meet them in DC or in other countries or in Israel, when I go to parliament or meet the government officials, when I go and rally on the streets, when I write op-eds, or when I go on interviews on media, or create even simple social media posts about my nieces and what it means for them to be without a father. Um, for me, that's pursuing a betterment of humanity to make people understand that hostage taking and the way it was done and then as a concept in it at all is simply wrong. And we have to erase it. This should be the last hostage crisis the world has ever faced. It's one of the most horrific one the world has ever faced, one of the longest one the world has ever faced. I wish it was the last one. I know it probably is not going to be, but my advocacy is also about the future generations alongside fighting for Omri, who needs to be home, and fighting for right now all the remaining 48 hostages, and initially, more than 250. So for me, that's how I pursue tzedakah now. Um, and we will how I find meaning in that. And I hope other people will find meaning in advocating for that cause as well until all the hostages are home. And hopefully we'll hear good news in the coming days or weeks.
Thank you so much, Moshe. This is just fabulous conversation. I really appreciate you joining me for this. I'm going to stop
Of
the
course.
recording.